Generally, these ships are not as moddable as escape velocity ships because of the restrictions on weapon and engine capacity, which you can't actually extend very easily. You can extend free mass, but not weapon or engine capacity with the existing outfits. So this is part of the reason why you need to build a fleet to adequately defend your flagship and everything that your freighters are carrying. We'll look at some of the other ships in the fleet here. So this is a Leviathan. It's a type of warship, heavy warship, which I pointed out earlier. I just called it a warship because I couldn't remember the exact class name. And it has nothing to do with the Leviathan from Nova. It's not really a freighter. It's basically a warship. So the weapon capacity is actually smaller than the Behemoth. But if you add the much larger engine capacity, it's just a more practical warship per se. The larger crew helps too because you can add these defensive weapons or offensive weapons for your crew for either boarding other ships or defending against boarders. I've given this one atomic engines, same as the Behemoth. That's my own ship. That's mostly for maneuverability rather than speed. And yeah, so this is a very similar value actually, around 5 million. Cargo capacity is tiny, although I've reduced that somewhat. It has some extra bunks, but not a lot of them. Here's a Falcon warship. Kind of a medium warship of sorts. Medium to heavy. It's also got a larger engine capacity than the Behemoth, so that does make it more practical as a warship. And it's got a pretty big crew. You can see from the number of weapons issued. And yeah, and it's got some extra bunks also. But again, not very much cargo. Next. This is a Corvette. This is very different from the Maskirovka Corvette from Escape Velocity, and I would argue it's not as good. However, it is still a cheap way to defend your fleet. Actually, that's an improvement. It's cheap. It just doesn't have the weapons capacity that it needs to really hit the enemy hard. And here's the Mule that I mentioned, this sort of well-defended cargo ship. It's a light freighter. Actually, yeah, it's pretty much a light freighter. 150 tons of capacity. Hasn't got a large crew, but it's got a lot of extra bunks. Then there's an Argosy. This is the only ship I'm aware of that was carried over from Escape Velocity, looking pretty close to the same. The Atenotic Kestrel is also in Endless Sky as an Easter egg, but I'm not counting it. The new Argosy has similar abilities. Its cargo capacity is not really comparable, but most other things are on it. It's pretty tough, so you can take it into parts of the Endless Sky universe where you're likely to get attacked and come out of it okay. Another Argosy. Another Argosy. These are actually captured pirate ships, to be honest. Another Behemoth that I've named the Kepler. Here's one of the bulk freighters. I mentioned they're a lot like the Leviathans from Nova, and you can see the similarity here. It's very obvious. And they have pretty much the largest cargo capacity. And how many tons of the weapons this ship can hold? I didn't actually put too many add-on weapons on these because I was worried about harming the cargo capacity. And they're pretty tough, much tougher than bulk freighter in the original escape velocity, so I'd let the warships and the fighters defend these. I have 20 of them, see, named after different explorers and scientists. This is a hauler. This is a stretched version, the Hauler 3. You can buy a fighter carrier version of this as well, several different versions. But is it really a warship in and of itself without it being one of the modded ones, factory modded ones? Not really. It's somewhat limited. It's basically a cheaper alternative to the bulk freighter until you can afford a bulk freighter. You get 270 tons of cargo capacity, just over half what the bulk freighter has. Very few crew bunks. It's basically a freighter. There's another one. There's a Clipper. The Clipper in name is carried over from escape velocity, and you could argue also in concept. However, it doesn't look like the Clipper from escape velocity, and it's fairly easy to argue that it's not as good a ship. Its cargo capacity is not particularly wonderful, even compared to the original Clipper from escape velocity. Is it particularly formidable in combat? Well, not really. It's, again, in this case, a captured pirate ship, so it's the only reason it's in the fleet. Another Clipper. Headhunters are fighters. In escape velocity, a fighter's a fighter. Some of them will go in your fighter bay and some will not if you have one. In Endless Sky, you don't really have the same kinds of fighters. You either have fighters which go into your fighter bay, which are called fighters, which can't do a hyperspace jump, or you have what are called interceptors, which are not interceptors at all. They're escorts, like this one. Actually, the Headhunter, along with the Quicksilver, the Rainmaker, and the Gunboat, is classified as a light warship in Endless Sky, so that makes it even more confusing. And the Headhunter is one of the nicest ones, actually. It also looks kind of cool. You can kind of see the plan form. Of course, you wouldn't need it to be shaped like this in space. Again, we're talking about junk science here. You don't need a spacecraft to be aerodynamic at all, but it looks a little bit like it could be from the 50s, maybe. Early 60s. So it kind of looks cool. And next one. Another Headhunter. I've actually named them after dogs of U.S. presidents. Not just the Headhunters, but all my fighters. With the exception of captured pirate ships. This is a Hawk. This is another one of the fighters available. Less impressive, certainly. Do we have any other classes of fighter here? Maybe not. We have a Berserker. It's another fighter class. Not so impressive. And a Quicksilver class fighter. These are decent. They're not amazing, but they're good value. And so I'm back to my flagship. So we'll take a look at some outfits, but before we can do that, we have to go to a star system that actually has them. It's actually color-coded. So these are actually commodities prices. So this is not actually what we're looking for. What we're looking for are outfitters. So if we went to, for example, you can drag the map with your left mouse button. If we go to Earth, as Earth is still in existence in Endless Sky, unlike Nave, we have enough fuel to get the whole fleet over to Earth. And on Earth, Earth has an outfitter.